off.
Okay. ISG, as we're calling ourselves these days, which is the shortened version of I&S Group, and we originated in 1973, and that was back in my parents' basement on North 5th Street, a couple blocks away from Franklin School. At that time, we were I&S engineers, named after Gene Isaacson and Ken Suprenant, and those two had an idea to put together an engineering company. Gene's job was to do the selling. He had been in concrete sales for North Star Concrete Pipe and North Star Concrete Products. And my dad was supposed to be doing the engineering. So Gene was going to bring the work in the door, and my dad was going to do the engineering of the work once it was in the door. Like all good plans, sometimes you end up having to tweak them a little bit. And about 1 year in, Gene ended up leaving the firm, saying, "Hey, you know what? I find that when we go out and sell these things, they want answers right there on the spot."
Oh.
And he says, that's not really what my history has been involved in. I haven't done that much design work, so it's hard for me to give the answers on the spot.
Sure.
And so frequently he would end up taking my dad out for the sales calls as well. And so then Gene says, well, what am I doing if you're kind of doing the sales and doing the engineering work? And so after about a year, Gene left and just never changed the name. Finally after a year, you're finally getting a little bit of name recognition, and there was just no good reason to go and change the name at that point in time. And it was the 70s. It wasn't necessarily a great economic time, and so they stayed on with they grew the company from about 4 people to start with to approximately 10, and it stayed like that for about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
After a couple of years, they ended up moving out of the basement of my folks' home out to a small office out on 3rd Avenue. In 1993, I was a recent graduate of Iowa State University in civil engineering, and I joined the firm at that point in time, and I was about the 10th employee. And recognizing that all of a sudden I was potentially a fairly large mouth to feed, decided that we had to start growing the company. Now, again, we're talking 22 years ago now. That was an important spot historically, I think, in the Mankato history. There were things that were happening up on the hillside. The River Hills Mall was just getting going, and there was a lot of, at least commercial development in the Mankato area. That meant a lot of opportunities for architecture and for engineering. And recognizing that I was probably going to be a relatively large mouth to feed, and that there were these opportunities coming about, we ended up kind of growing as a firm. I wanted to make sure that those opportunities that did exist were things that we would be doing, otherwise we were just opening the door for competition. And so we grew modestly, I would say, through the 1990s, getting to approximately 20 people about 20 people or so by the year 2000. And then we recognized that the residential housing boom, not just in the Mankato area, but in southern Minnesota, which is also nationally too, but in southern Minnesota we were doing a lot of designs of residential developments. We didn't think that that was necessarily a long-term play for us, but it was a way to do design work, relatively profitable design work, and also build the company, the infrastructure of the company, and the various types of services that we wanted to provide. And so we took full advantage of it, knowing that it was probably going to go away at some point in time. And so we had built up our firm to a relatively large size, maybe 75 people or so, prior to the recession and the housing bubble bursting and all those things. In 2004, we had opened up a branch office in Faribault. Okay. But most of our growth was in Mankato. So say pre-recession, we had gotten up to about 75 people, maybe 20 people in Faribault, the balance 55 or so here in Mankato. And the recession came, and it hurt. It wasn't great for us. We probably ended up backtracking about 15% or so through the depths of the recession, which 15% doesn't sound good, but in comparison to our industry, 15% is not bad. And then we really changed as a firm. There was some things that we were trying to implement prior to the recession about changing our approach. Instead of being so geographically focused where you have to get as much market share as you possibly can, what we were trying to end up doing was become a little bit more client focused. Let's find clients that have multiple projects. And while we were able to get that going prior to the recession, we didn't have that real necessity reason to do it. The recession provided the necessity.
Okay.
And so then when the recession hit, we were actually put those plans into traction, and we kind of came out of the recession, I think, a little bit faster than most, with a real strong focus on clients. And those clients have taken us throughout the region, throughout the nation, and expanded the services that we provide to clients too. So since the recession, we've really taken off considerably.
Okay.
And then in January of 2012, we had acquired a small, relatively small, civil engineering and land surveying firm in rural Iowa, Algona and Storm Lake, Iowa. They were about 40 people or so. And then that went reasonably well, expanded our geographic footprint so that we could have more touches with the client-centric clients that we were looking for. And then about a year after that, it was over Christmas, New Year's time, I had gotten the goofy idea that, you know, I'll talk to our biggest local competitor from an architecture standpoint. And I had sent off an email to Brian Paulson saying, hey, you know, just kind of out of the blue, but if you want to go have a beer or something like that, I'd be happy to meet you down at Pub 500. Okay. And he responded to that, sure, that sounds like a good idea. And he had just been recently named as president of the American Institute of Architects at the time. And so he was sharing with me some ideas and some thoughts about the emerging professionals, the younger professionals in the architectural world. And so we were able to share some interesting stories about the newer generation coming into the profession and some of their thoughts, and commiserate a little bit. And I explained a little bit of our philosophy about how we were trying to grow. And part of our growth was, as I said, probably a larger footprint, larger geographic footprint. And we had always held Paulson Architects in really high regard because they were so good. They'd done so much of the local work. And at a time in the recession when we really had to do some smart things. We couldn't just go chase stuff that was frivolous to us, or couldn't chase something that we didn't think we had a very good chance of getting. So we had, you know, not that we had ever told the Paulsons this, of course, but internally we had kind of waved the white flag. Hey, we're not going to go after some of these things in the Mankato area because we just don't think it's worth our time and effort to go after them because we're not going to get them. And so I think he was maybe a little bit bemused by that internal look of our philosophy and perhaps the fact that I was willing to share it. But at that point in time, we had already played out our plan. And our plan was working, and we were doing a good job regionally and nationally. And I think we both left that meeting saying, hey, you know, this was a good first discussion of these parts. Let's kind of ruminate on this. And we got together again about 3 months later and started talking in a little bit more seriousness about, do you have an exit strategy, and is there a way that we could possibly be part of that? And that was April of 2013, and the upshot of that conversation was, I think we can make something work, but let's start talking a little bit more about details. And from that spot in April, May of 2013, we really put the foot on the accelerator going forward. And I can't remember the exact date. I want to say it was October 10th of 2013. We culminated the deal, got it done, and so it was interesting from October of 2013 to January of 2014, we had our offices here, but Paulson's had their offices kitty corner across the street in the Northwest Office Building. And our first attempt at integration of the two firms was send a few ISG folks across the street and send a few Paulson people back this way.
Okay.
And we got that going, and then we came up here into our office, broke into 6th floor, and built this out to get everybody all under one roof. And we've been like that now for 14 months. Things have been going really well with that. Well, you know, I think I've been, I would say, very involved in the local economy and the volunteerism efforts of growing the greater Mankato area, Blue Earth County area. And, you know, there's various reasons for doing that. And I was born in New Ulm, Minnesota, but at the time I was about 10 months old or so. We had moved to Mankato, and I've been in Mankato essentially ever since, except for going to Iowa State and then living up in Minneapolis for a portion of time. My parents always felt that it was very important to be, you know, improve the place that you're at. Yeah. If there's something wrong with the place that you're at, you do something to make it better. Don't just turn tail and run, right. Figure out a way to make things better. And obviously there's a benefit to any time that you're providing a service as well. If you can make things better, improve upon things in your local area, that obviously means more work for yourself too. Right. I mean, that's probably the selfish component of it, but I really believe that there's so many more indirect benefits to that. You know, in recent years, the Mankato area has been named a metropolitan statistical area, which has been, I think, an extremely timely and critical thing for us. Oh, yeah. It's literally put us on the map for a number of people looking at us that wouldn't have otherwise looked at the Mankato area. So in response to that, I think the Mankato area, through different organizations, has figured out that we need to step up our game. It's meant an awful lot of different things that are physical in nature, bricks and mortar type of things, road improvements, those types. But it's also, I think, been an internal thing as well of how do we look at maybe our education differently. And you see investments that we're making as a regional center all over the place and how we're doing things differently. And we've just recently passed a referendum for School District 77. Yep. That referendum is making improvements and expansions to Dakota Meadows. It's building a brand new Prairie Winds Middle School on the east side and making improvements at both East and West High School. Finally got our legislative work done, and the deconstruction that's occurring right now to make way for the Civic Center expansion is obviously another large project that one sees as part of our ever-evolving evolution here in Mankato. And then, you know, we're also seeing all kinds of private investment coming this way as well. So the Mankato area, I think, has really raised itself to that challenge. I think that's what I like about Blue Earth County Historical Society and all of these new things that we're doing, coupled with being rooted in history, is what parts of those things can we develop a common element or a common thread, and how can we save the things that need to be saved, how can we highlight some of those things and make them be part of this, yet also understand that history is all in how you perceive it. If you're a person that just moved into Mankato area right now, everything that's been done previously is history. Right. I think some of us people, and I guess now I'm becoming one of those old timers, but I think some of us start thinking of anything that happened in the area that we were born in is no longer history. That's just stuff that happened new. And the reality is we are building history right now, and that's natural. It's human nature to be continually improving things, and so history is a little bit what you make of it and how you perceive it. And while yes, we are in the business at times of taking some things down to make those improvements, I think the history also is part of what can we save, and like I said, what can we highlight and bring forward as well. Yeah, it's very easy to romanticize about, oh, that was such a wonderful building, I can't believe it burnt, or I can't believe it fell down, or I can't believe we decided to demolish it, when, well, maybe it burnt because it wasn't such a great building, or maybe it fell down because it wasn't so great, but certainly it's part of those memory things where you romanticize a little bit about the past, and maybe some of the things that have gone by the wayside, there is some good reason for it. Again, I think we just need to be very intentional about what it is that we want to save moving forward. And clearly there have been plenty of mistakes that have been made, of things that have gone down. I do think that the city center area here is very interesting. You've got a Grafe building right across the alley and a Brett's building across the alley that are things that have been saved, and they're in the midst of the building that we're in right now was built in 1982. By no means an old building, but it's already been completely facelifted once. We've got a civic center that I think was completed in 1993 or 1994. In addition to that, that's under construction. But a land camera building that was 1930s vintage type of building. So, you're getting kind of an interesting patchwork of things. Yeah. Well, I think the next steps that we have to do, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, is that recognition of us being a true regional center. And, good friends of mine have heard me say, hey, we're a metropolitan statistic area, we're an MSA, and now we have to start acting like one. That's one of my favorite lines, I guess. But I think there's a responsibility that comes with that, a responsibility to our own citizenry, but also a responsibility to that region to which we serve. And that means, how do we make the improvements necessary to our educational system, not just K-12, but how do we make improvements at Bethany? How do we make improvements at MSU? How do we make improvements at South Central College that truly make us a regional center? One of the things that I'm involved in is Project ABE, the Agricultural Business Epicenter through Greater Mankato Growth. And that's all about recognizing that agriculture is not just another one of the business sectors in the region. It is the the building block that I think everything else is built off of. Without agriculture around here, we don't have much of anything else. There isn't a reason to have a regional health center here if we don't have an agricultural base. There's not a reason to have regional shopping if we don't have agriculture. So that recognition and starting to take an agricultural piece, which is truly our natural resource, how do we embed that more into an MSU or a South Central College? Say, where's our agricultural educational opportunities, and why are we not educating in that fashion? And that's truly what our natural resource is. Colorado School of Mines didn't come about because there weren't mines in Colorado. So I think that level of intentionality is absolutely necessary. In the business world, if you're not intentional about the things you're doing, if you're just scattered, you usually fail. You need to focus in. I think kind of taking a little bit of that business acumen or business theory to community building is the same way. How do you become intentional? From a marketing perspective, what are you good at? If we're good at agriculture, then let's be really good at it. And so I think those are the types of things that I see as we move forward as a community, really getting wiser, figuring out who we truly are, and not taking that shotgun approach. Figuring out truly who we are, and maybe that is agriculture, but then how do all the other ancillary pieces come in and support and reinforce that primary point? Well, right now, the things that Mankato Civic Center, Verizon Civic Center expansion. Yeah, the event center. We're also, we're doing the design work of that, the design of all of the School District 77 improvements. We are the co-designers of MSU's Clinical Sciences building that's just getting going right now. And there's, it's so hard to even count. The things that I guess I take pride in some of the smaller things at times. I mean, a lot of the subdivisions that we've designed, you drive through and it's like, I remember laying that street out on a piece of onion skin, with big magic marker type things and just trying to shape how that was going to look. And now all of a sudden, maybe 20 years later, you're driving on those streets and you see mature trees and those types of things. But, there's an awful lot of building design things. And then the Paulson side of things, too, brings such a rich history of having their fingerprints on projects and buildings throughout the whole area. It's, we see, kind of everything, it's brand new buildings. It's the Landcammer building from probably 10 years ago, that being renovated and redone. Within just our eyesight right here, we've got the Northwest Office Building, Tandem Bagels, Bluth and Gage and Krause, which is now going to become the Mankato Area Foundation and nonprofit center. The Landcammer Building, working on concept designs right now for a large tower, probably in the 10 to 14 story range. The event center here, and these are just things here within 2 blocks.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. And I remember growing up on North 5th Street, and in our backyard we had a really, really nice sandbox. And I remember spending, in one particular summer, just the whole time sitting cross-legged in the sandbox, just building stuff constantly. And to be able to do that in your hometown, go get your education, come back, and then build things again. It's kind of like a bigger sandbox. It's pretty cool. And so there's a lot of pride with that. I think from a business perspective, it's been so good to be in the Mankato area with the people that are here. So many people that have taught me so many things that hopefully I've been able to instill within the people in our organization. And so that Mankato resource of minds and things that have mentored, being able to take that and then go to all the other communities and the different projects, it's like being able to take a little bit of Mankato fingerprint and put it somewhere else too. So yeah, the people along the way that have helped you get to that point are just, it's really limitless number of folks.
Yeah.
Really I'd say in the last 20 years, probably 90% of the new streets, new lots, new developments we've done. And I made mention of working on the onion skin, or bumwad as you may call it, and literally writing on those things with magic markers to develop what those things would look like. And it's essentially a whole square mile from Drummer's Garden Center all the way up to Wickersham, from Highway 22 over to the golf club. That's a square mile right there, and that's almost fully developed. Then other areas south of town, the whole South Brook area, the areas by the Rosa Parks Elementary, various spots up in North Mankato as well. It's been a fun experience doing those types of things. And then you start seeing new employees that come to town, or my kids and their friends on a traveling baseball team or traveling basketball team, and you start looking where these folks live, and it's like, 16 years ago I was working on that subdivision, and sizing, you know, the things that so many people kind of take for granted, but sizing the sanitary sewer and the water main and the storm sewer and designing the stormwater detention ponds and those types of things. So, you know, there's all kinds of different design elements. It's not just vertical construction and buildings, but it's all of the other things that go with it that, you know, make for a civilized society and being able to have nice little neighborhoods. You know, one project that I think is really interesting too is the Riverfront Park area that Paulson's had a lot to do with the design of that. But that, you know, is taking a piece of property, you know, right there at the Dotson Foundry and really reclaiming that whole river area. And, you know, unfortunately we're in a river valley that floods, and so we've got our flood walls, but being able to get on, being able to get on that side, the river side of the flood wall, and give people a different perception of what the river is, instead of just a concrete wall, but having a great venue for people to get together with the amphitheater, and, you know, that's a fantastic venue for outdoor events. You know, and it's interesting too, you know, one of the things that I guess I failed to mention is my dad, both of my folks grew up in southwestern Minnesota. My dad grew up in Curry and my mom in Slayton, and they had taken their hand at farming, and they didn't come from particularly wealthy families at all, and eventually they were just having a hard time getting the loans necessary to get the appropriate equipment and all that. And they just said, you know, there's got to be a better way, and so they ended up going off and making the decision as to who was going to get the education. It ultimately landed on my dad, just because at that time and gender and all that, it was probably going to just be one of them. And I think it was really kind of a coin toss as to which one it was going to end up being. And ultimately it just ended up being, from a practical perspective, gender, I think, that made that decision for them. So he went to Iowa State, got a civil engineering degree, did that on the GI Bill because he was in the Army kind of at the tail end of the Korean War, and was a non-traditional student, about 30 years old or so when he was at Iowa State, already with 3 little kids. I was not one of them. And so they went to Iowa State, and when he graduated in 1966, his first job was with the city of Mankato as the assistant city engineer. And he was on board for about 6 months, and they fired the city engineer, so they made him the acting city engineer 6 months out of college. And while he loved the work, he thought it was really interesting, and he was here at the time of the 1968 flood.
Okay.
It was also a time when, in order to become licensed as an engineer, you have to work under a licensed engineer. And, well, the person that he was working under got fired, and so he enjoyed the responsibility of that job, but he also knew, I have to get out of here in order to become a licensed engineer, and being licensed is really the lifeblood of what we do. So he went off and became assistant city engineer over in New Ulm in order to get his licensure, and then started up I&S Group. But that history of being the acting city engineer in the late 60s here in Mankato really was something that kind of immediately got us rooted into the Mankato area for some people that actually grew up in the southwestern portion of the state. That whole perception of who you are and what you are, I think of us as nothing but Mankatoans. And I know my folks, my dad passed away about 3.5 years ago, but I know my folks think of themselves always as Mankatoans, and so I just kind of at times just assume we've always been here. But in reality, you know, they spent 30-some years of their life elsewhere before they came to Mankato and really made it home.
Yeah.
And it really was home. I mean, it was the place where all 4 of their kids got their high school diplomas. I think 3 of us kids spent some time at Mankato State. I know only my brother ended up getting his college education here at Mankato State. It was Mankato State at the time. And then I was the only one that spent whole time off at Iowa State. My sister also was at Iowa State for a little bit of time, but yeah, it's very much been home, and I always wanted to come back. I wanted to get away from high school. I wanted to get away from my high school friends. I wanted to just go somewhere and be anonymous for a while. But I also knew very much that Mankato was home. I knew that I had a very nice opportunity here to do something, and frankly, it's been a true blessing of my life to be able to work with my parents, and they were with me at this job from 1993 until about 2008.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so probably the last 6-7 years or so, they've not been involved with the business. And then, you know, it's not very often that you get to work with family like that, and to be able to do it in a relatively successful fashion is nice, and still be friends afterwards. They did such a nice job for me, though. They never put any constraints on things. We agreed on most things, and the things that we didn't agree on, we did so, for the most part, pretty civilly. You know, there were a few fights along the way, a couple shouting matches, I know. But, no, we were pretty civil about it. I tell so many people that I think came on board, and, you know, most of the decisions that were being made at the time that I started was my mother and my father making the decisions, Ken and Mary Jo. And my dad was kind of a big dreamer, and my mother was the practical one that said, well, I don't know how we can afford that, or we're never going to be able to pay for that. And so she was kind of the no vote, and my dad was always the yes vote. And I came on board and I kind of broke the tie, and typically I would side with my dad, so my mom got outnumbered on a lot of those things. I was never very conservative about some of the business things, and you know, they worked out pretty well though, and it was nice because my mother, even though we sometimes would go against her way of doing it, what it forced you to do is it did force you to look at things from a different perspective.
Sure.
And all right, if I understand this end of the spectrum, even though it's this end of the spectrum that I want to do, it forces you to look at all of the different things and how things can fail, go wrong. And if we do this, am I willing to accept the worst possible outcome of making that decision? And is that risk of the worst possible outcome, or is the specific worst possible outcome so bad that you shouldn't be making that decision? And so, while with any decision, somebody's going to get their way, somebody's not going to get their way, it gave you a real appreciation for being able to look at things and be able to problem solve.
Sure.